I stood in that sterile hospital hallway clutching my phone so tight my knuckles went white. The Instagram story was still playing on repeat. Thorn, my son-in-law, champagne bottle raised high, designer sunglasses reflecting the yacht's deck, beautiful women in bikinis laughing around him. The timestamp showed 30 minutes ago, 30 minutes while my daughter Maribel lay unconscious 3 floors above me, machines keeping her alive after the accident that should have killed her. He didn't even know yet. Before I begin this story, can you tell me where in the world you're listening from? The first call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday that would split my life into before and after. I knew it was bad news before I even answered. Nobody calls a 67-year-old woman at that hour unless someone is dying or dead. My hand shook as I reached for the phone on my nightstand, knocking over the water glass I kept there. The crash of breaking glass mixed with the shrill ringtone created a symphony of dread that still echoes in my memory. Mrs. Cordelia Vance? The voice was professional, tired. Night shift at the hospital. I'd heard that tone before when my husband died 5 years ago. This is Dr. Kala Voss at Mercy General. Your daughter Maribel has been in an accident. The words hit me like physical blows. Maribel, my only child. The one person in this world who still called me mama when she thought nobody was listening. I sat up in bed, already reaching for the clothes I'd thrown over the chair, my mind racing ahead to worst-case scenarios. How bad? I managed to whisper. She's alive, but it's serious. A head-on collision on Highway 9. The other driver ran a red light. She's in intensive care. Doctor. Voss paused, and in that pause I heard everything she wasn't saying. Touch and go, could go either way. Prepare yourself, we need you here as soon as possible. I was already pulling on my shoes, grabbing my keys. What about Thorn, her husband? Is he there? My granddaughter Juniper was only 8. Someone needed to be watching her, making sure she didn't wake up to an empty house and a world turned upside down. Another pause. Longer this time. We haven't been able to reach him yet. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Of course it did. Thorn never answered his phone when it mattered. During Maribel's pregnancy complications, he was at a golf tournament. When she had postpartum depression, he was on a business trip that somehow included stops at 3 different casinos. When my husband died and Maribel needed support, Thorn was launching his latest get-rich-quick scheme and couldn't be bothered with family grief. I drove to the hospital through empty streets, my ancient Honda wheezing with each acceleration. The radio played soft rock hits from the 80s. The kind of music that belonged to a world where daughters didn't lie broken in hospital beds while their husbands disappeared into the night. I kept thinking about the last conversation Maribel and I had, 3 days ago over coffee at her kitchen table. She'd looked tired, older than her 32 years. When I asked if everything was okay, she just smiled, that fake smile she'd perfected since marrying Thorn, and said everything was fine. Everything was always fine with Maribel, even when it wasn't. Even when the bills piled up because Thorn's latest business venture tanked. Even when he forgot her birthday 3 years running. Even when he started staying out later and later, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. She protected him the way she'd protected broken birds as a child, nurturing something that might never learn to fly on its own. The hospital parking garage was nearly empty, my footsteps echoing off concrete walls as I hurried toward the elevators. The ICU was on the 4th floor, behind 2 sets of locked doors and a nurse's station that looked like mission control. Everything was beeping and humming, the sound of modern medicine doing its best to keep death at bay. I gave my name to the night nurse, a kind-eyed man named Oswin, who looked like he'd seen too much suffering for someone barely out of college. Room 412, he said softly. She's sedated right now. The next 24 hours will be critical. I walked down that hallway on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glow that made the world look like an overexposed photograph. Room 412 was the 3rd door on the right, and when I stepped inside, the sight of my daughter nearly brought me to my knees. Maribel lay surrounded by machines, her beautiful face swollen and bruised beyond recognition. A ventilator breathed for her, tubes and wires connecting her to monitors that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every moment between life and death. Her dark hair, which she'd always worn long like her grandmother's, was matted with blood and tucked behind her ears by some well-meaning nurse. She looked so small in that hospital bed, smaller than she'd been as a child when I used to read her bedtime stories about princesses who saved themselves. I pulled the visitor's chair close to her bed and took her hand. It was warm, thank God, still warm and soft despite everything. "I'm here, baby," I whispered. "Mama's here." The monitors beeped steadily, the only response I got. The only response I might get. That's when I decided to call Thorne myself. Maybe the hospital had the wrong number. Maybe his phone was dead. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation for why my daughter's husband wasn't here, wasn't holding her hand, wasn't fighting for her life with the same desperate energy that was keeping me upright. I scrolled through my contacts until I found his name, then pressed call. It rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail, just like Dr. Voss had said. "You've reached Thorne Blackwater. I'm probably out living my best life. Leave a message if it's important." Even his voicemail message made me want to scream. Living his best life, while his wife fought for hers. I tried calling 3 more times with the same result. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened Instagram on my phone and searched for Thorne's account. I told myself I was looking for clues, some indication of where he might be, some reasonable explanation for his absence. What I found instead was a series of posts from earlier that evening. Thorne on a yacht, champagne in hand, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. Beautiful people with perfect smiles and expensive clothes, the kind of people who belonged in a different world than the one where my daughter lay dying. The timestamp on the last post was less than an hour ago. While I was driving through empty streets, terrified and alone, Thorne was raising a toast to something worth celebrating. While doctors worked to save his wife's life, he was posing for photos with women whose names he probably didn't even know. But it was the location tag that made my blood run cold. Sunset Marina, Lake Minnehaha, 40 minutes away. He was 40 minutes away, living his best life while his family fell apart. I screenshotted everything. Every photo, every smiling face, every moment of joy that existed in parallel to my daughter's suffering. Then I kissed Maribel's forehead and whispered a promise I intended to keep. "I'll be right back, sweetheart. Mama's going to bring Daddy home." The drive to Sunset Marina gave me time to think, which was dangerous territory. Thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to the uncomfortable truth that this wasn't the first time Thorne had vanished during a crisis. It was just the biggest one. I thought about Maribel's wedding day 6 years ago, how radiant she'd looked in her grandmother's dress. How convinced she was that Thorne would change once they were married. I'd seen the red flags even then, the way he'd disappeared for 3 hours on their wedding morning, claiming he needed air and time to think. The way he'd spent their reception charming everyone else while barely speaking to his new bride. The way he'd looked at his phone more than he looked at Maribel during their first dance. But my daughter had always been a fixer. Even as a little girl, she brought home stray cats and broken toys, convinced that enough love could heal anything. When she met Thorne at that marketing conference in Chicago, she saw a charming man with big dreams and a troubled past. What I saw was a con artist who'd found his perfect mark, a woman who would sacrifice herself on the altar of his potential, believing that her love could transform him into the man she deserved. The pattern started small, forgetting anniversaries, showing up late to family dinners, always having an excuse for why he couldn't quite follow through on his promises. When Maribel got pregnant with Juniper, Thorne talked about becoming a better man, about settling down and building a real life together. For a few months he played the part convincingly. He went to doctor's appointments, bought baby furniture, even talked about taking a steady job with his brother's construction company. But when complications arose in the 7th month and Maribel was put on bed rest, Thorne's true nature emerged. He couldn't handle the stress, couldn't cope with the reality of his wife's needs superseding his wants. That's when the business trips started, the mysterious meetings that required him to be away for days at a time. I stayed with Maribel during those weeks, watching her make excuses for his absence while secretly doubting whether he'd even show up for the birth. He did show up, 20 minutes after Juniper was born, smelling like whiskey and claiming his phone had died. The nurse who handed him his daughter looked at him with barely concealed disgust, but Maribel just smiled and said she was glad he made it. That was my daughter in a nutshell, always grateful for crumbs when she deserved the whole meal. The pattern continued after Juniper's birth. When Maribel struggled with postpartum depression, Thorne treated her illness like a personal inconvenience. While she battled the darkness that threatened to swallow her whole, He pursued his latest scheme to flip houses with money they didn't have. When that fell through, there was the food truck idea, then the cryptocurrency investment that wiped out their savings. Each failure followed by promises to do better, to be better, to finally become the husband and father his family deserved. I pulled into the marina parking lot and sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage and fury in equal measure. The place was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive boats bobbing in the water, each one worth more than most people's houses. A playground for people who had more money than sense, more privilege than responsibility. The kind of place where a man could hide from his real life behind champagne and shallow laughter. The yacht wasn't hard to find. The music was loud enough to wake the dead, and the laughter carried across the water like mockery. I could see figures moving on the deck, silhouettes against the warm glow of party lights. Thorne's laugh stood out above the rest, booming and careless, the sound of a man without a care in the world. I walked down the dock on unsteady legs, my purse clutched against my chest like armor. The closer I got, the clearer the scene became. Beautiful people in beautiful clothes having beautiful fun while my daughter fought for her life 40 miles away. A woman in a bikini that cost more than my mortgage payment was draped across Thorne's shoulders, whispering something in his ear that made him throw back his head and roar with laughter. That's when I understood something that should have been obvious years ago. This wasn't a man struggling with his demons, fighting to become better for the sake of his family. This was a man who had made a choice, not once, but repeatedly, every day for 6 years. He had chosen this life, this version of himself, this reality where his wants mattered more than his wife's needs, where his pleasure trumped his daughter's security, where his freedom was worth more than his family's lives. The woman in the bikini saw me first. She nudged Thorne and pointed in my direction, saying something I couldn't hear over the music. He turned, and even in the dim light I could see his expression change. Surprise, then annoyance, then something that might have been fear. Good. He should be afraid. I climbed aboard without waiting for an invitation. The party chatter died as people realized an unwelcome guest had crashed their perfect evening. Thorne set down his champagne glass and tried to arrange his face into something resembling concern. "Cordelia? What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" His voice was slightly slurred, his eyes struggling to focus. How long had he been drinking? How many hours had he spent celebrating while his wife lay unconscious? "Your wife is in intensive care," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Car accident 3 hours ago. The hospital's been trying to reach you." I held up my phone, showing him the screenshots I'd taken. "But I can see you've been busy." The color drained from his face, but not in the way I'd expected. This wasn't the look of a man devastated by news of his wife's condition. This was the look of a man caught red-handed, calculating his next move, figuring out how to minimize the damage to his reputation. "Oh God," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is she? How bad is it?" The question came out flat, performative, like he was reading lines from a script he'd never bothered to memorize. "Bad enough," I replied. "Bad enough that you should have been there hours ago. Bad enough that your 8-year-old daughter is going to wake up wondering where her father is while her mother fights for her life." The woman in the bikini had backed away, suddenly fascinated by her phone. The other party guests were doing that thing people do when they witness private family drama in public spaces, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. This was going to be gossip fodder for weeks, and we both knew it. "I'll come right now," Thorne said, already reaching for his keys. I didn't know. If I had known. "You would have what?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was past caring about social niceties. "Left your party? Cut short your fun? Actually answered your phone for once in your miserable life?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. 6 years of watching my daughter make excuses for this man. 6 years of biting my tongue and keeping the peace for the sake of family harmony. 6 years of watching the light dim in my daughter's eyes while she loved a man who didn't deserve her breath in his lungs. "She could die tonight," I said, and finally I saw something real flicker across his face. "While you're here playing dress-up with children half your age, the mother of your child could be taking her last breath. And you know what the worst part is? She'll probably spend what time she has left making excuses for you. Telling the nurses you must be stuck in traffic, or that your phone died, or that you're handling things at home, because that's what she does. She protects you from the consequences of being exactly who you are." The truth hung in the air like smoke, visible and suffocating. Thorne looked around at his audience. These people who didn't know him well enough to judge him, who would forget his name by morning and move on to the next party, the next scandal, the next entertainment. Then he looked at me and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Shame. Following Thorne's car through the dark streets felt like hunting prey, and maybe that's exactly what it was. He drove too fast, weaving between lanes like he was trying to outrun his own conscience. I kept pace, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, refusing to let him disappear again. This man had been vanishing from his responsibilities his entire adult life. Not tonight. Not when it mattered most. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. The hospital. My heart lurched as I answered, terrified they were calling with news I wasn't ready to hear. Mrs. Vance? This is Doc Us. I wanted to update you on Maribel's condition. I pulled into the hospital parking garage behind Thorne, watching him stumble out of his car like a man walking to his own execution. Is she? I couldn't finish the question. Stable for now. We've managed to reduce the swelling in her brain and her vitals are holding steady, but the next few hours remain critical. Where are you? We have some papers that need to be signed. In the parking garage. With her husband. The words tasted bitter. Husband. What a joke. Husbands don't abandon their wives during medical emergencies to party on yachts with women young enough to be their daughters. Husbands don't need to be hunted down like criminals when their families need them most. Thorne was waiting by the elevators when I approached and he looked like hell. Good. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were bloodshot from too much champagne and too little sleep. But it was the expression on his face that struck me most. Not grief. Not fear for his wife's life. Inconvenience. This was inconveniencing him. Cordelia, I want you to know. He started as we stepped into the elevator. Save it. I pushed the button for the 4th floor harder than necessary. I don't want to hear your excuses or your explanations or your promises to do better. I want you to walk into that ICU and look at what your selfishness has cost. The elevator rose in silence, but I could feel his agitation radiating off him like heat. He kept checking his phone, scrolling through messages, probably trying to explain to his party friends why he'd had to leave so abruptly. The urge to grab that phone and throw it against the wall was overwhelming. She was driving to my house, I said quietly, remembering what the police officer had told me when he'd called earlier. Did you know that? The accident happened on Maple Street, 2 blocks from my neighborhood. She was coming to see me at 11 o'clock at night because something was wrong. Something was so wrong that she couldn't wait until morning. Thorne's hand stilled on his phone. What do you mean? I mean your wife was driving through town at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, upset enough to risk driving when she should have been home in bed. What did you do to her, Thorne? What did you do that sent her running to her mother in the middle of the night? The elevator doors opened before he could answer, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. He knew exactly what had sent Maribel out into the night, and it wasn't anything he wanted to explain to me or anyone else. We walked through the ICU in silence past the nurse's station where Oswin nodded at me with tired sympathy. Room 412 looked different with Thorne in it. Smaller somehow, like his presence diminished everything around him. He stopped in the doorway, staring at his wife as if he'd never seen her before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe for the first time in their marriage he was really looking at her, seeing past his own needs and wants to the woman who'd given him everything and gotten so little in return. Jesus, he whispered, and there was genuine shock in his voice. She looks broken? I suggested. Yeah, that happens when you get hit by a drunk driver running a red light. That happens when your skull fractures and your brain swells and machines have to breathe for you. He moved to the other side of her bed and I watched his face as he took in the extent of her injuries. The bruising, the swelling, the tubes and wires that were keeping her alive. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something real break through his carefully constructed facade. Love, maybe. Or at least regret. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical, I continued, settling into my chair. Brain injuries are unpredictable. She could wake up completely fine or she could not. I couldn't say the words out loud. Not yet. Thorne reached for her hand, then hesitated, like he wasn't sure he had the right to touch her. Can she hear us? They think so. Doctor Voss said we should talk to her, let her know we're here. I leaned forward and brushed a strand of hair away from Maribel's face. I've been telling her about Juniper, how brave she was when the neighbor called to tell her mommy was in the hospital, how she packed her own bag to stay at Miss Patterson's house, and how she asked if she could bring mommy her favorite blanket. Something cracked in Thorne's expression at the mention of his daughter. Good. Let him think about what this was doing to Juniper. Let him consider the possibility that his daughter might grow up without a mother while he was too busy living his best life to care. Where does she think I am? He asked quietly. I looked at him across our daughter's broken body and told him the truth. I told her you were taking care of something important for mommy. Because that's what parents do. We protect our children from the harsh realities of the world for as long as possible. We don't let them know that sometimes the people who are supposed to love them most are the ones who hurt them the deepest. Dr. Voss appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. She was younger than I'd expected, probably Maribel's age, with kind eyes that had seen too much tragedy for someone so young. Mr. Blackwater, I assume? I need to discuss your wife's treatment options with you. They stepped outside to talk, leaving me alone with my daughter. I could hear their voices in the hallway, Dr. Voss explaining procedures and possibilities while Thorne asked questions that revealed how little he actually knew about his wife's life, her medical history, her insurance information, her emergency contacts. I was listed as her primary contact, not him. That should have told him everything he needed to know about the state of their marriage. When they returned, Thorne looked pale and shaken. Dr. Voss had probably explained the risks, the possibilities, the long road ahead if Maribel survived. Brain injuries weren't like broken bones. They didn't heal cleanly or quickly. They changed people, sometimes fundamentally. The woman who woke up might not be the same woman who went to sleep behind the wheel of her car, desperate to reach her mother. I need to call work, Thorne said suddenly. Let them know I won't be in tomorrow. Work? I stared at him. Your wife is fighting for her life and you're worried about work? I have responsibilities, Cordelia. Bills to pay, a mortgage, insurance premiums. Someone has to think practically about these things. He was already pulling out his phone, that expensive device that never seemed to work when his family needed him but functioned perfectly when he needed to make excuses. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious from the moment I found him on that yacht. This wasn't a man in shock struggling to process his wife's condition. This wasn't a husband devastated by the possibility of losing the love of his life. This was a man calculating the inconvenience, measuring the cost, figuring out how to minimize the disruption to his carefully constructed world. And that's when I started planning, because if Thorne thought he could continue living his life as if nothing had changed, continue pursuing his selfish pleasures while my daughter fought for every breath, continue being exactly who he'd always been without consequences, he was about to learn otherwise. I watched him step into the hallway to make his calls and I pulled out my own phone. There were things I needed to know, questions that needed answers before I could move forward with what I was beginning to plan, starting with why my daughter had been driving to see me at 11 o'clock at night, and what she'd discovered that had sent her fleeing into the darkness. The answers, I suspected, were somewhere in her phone, her computer, her carefully organized life that Thorne had been slowly destroying for 6 years. And while he made excuses to his boss about family emergencies, I was going to find them. Dawn came slow and gray through the hospital room window, painting everything in shades of exhaustion and fear. I hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with my daughter's labored breathing the only sound between the beeping machines and Thorne's occasional sighs. He'd been in and out all night, making phone calls, checking emails, treating the ICU like a branch office rather than the place where his wife lay dying. Juniper arrived at 8 a.m. with Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor who'd been watching her since the accident. My granddaughter looked so small in her rumpled pajamas and mismatched socks, her dark hair tangled from a restless night. She clutched her mother's favorite blanket, the soft blue one Maribel had kept since childhood, and her eyes were wide with the kind of fear that children feel when their world tilts off its axis. "Grandma Cordy," she whispered, using the nickname she'd given me as a toddler. "Is Mama going to be okay?" I knelt down to her level and pulled her into my arms, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and innocence. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes the people we love most get hurt in ways that can't be fixed with bandages and kisses? How do you prepare a child for the possibility that her world might never be the same? "The doctors are doing everything they can," I told her, which was true even if it wasn't the whole truth. "Mama's sleeping right now, but she can hear us when we talk to her. Would you like to tell her about your sleepover at Mrs. Patterson's?" Juniper nodded solemnly and approached her mother's bed with the careful reverence children reserve for things they don't understand but instinctively fear. She placed the blue blanket next to Maribel's hand and began to whisper stories about the pancakes Mrs. Patterson had made for breakfast, about how her cat Whiskers had slept on her feet all night, about how she'd been brave even though she was scared. Thorne watched from the corner, and for once his phone was silent in his pocket. Maybe seeing his daughter trying to be brave in the face of unimaginable circumstances had penetrated whatever shield of selfishness he'd built around his heart. Or maybe he was just calculating how much time he could afford to spend here before his next meeting. His next opportunity, his next escape from the reality of being a husband and father. "Daddy?" Juniper turned to him with those big brown eyes that looked so much like her mother's. "Why weren't you here last night?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, innocent and devastating in the way only children's questions can be. Thorne opened his mouth, closed it, looked at me as if I might provide him with an acceptable lie. When I remained silent, he knelt down beside his daughter and tried to explain the inexplicable. I had to take care of some things for Mama," he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "I got here as soon as I could." Juniper accepted this explanation the way children do, with trust that would be eroded over time as she grew old enough to recognize the patterns, the absences, the half-truths that had defined her father's relationship with their family. But for now she believed him because she needed to believe him, because the alternative was too frightening for a child's mind to process. Dr. Voss arrived for her morning rounds, bringing news that was neither good nor bad but somewhere in the terrifying middle ground of uncertainty. The swelling in Maribel's brain had stabilized, but she wasn't showing signs of consciousness yet. Her body was healing, but her mind remained locked away somewhere we couldn't reach. "Brain injuries are unpredictable," Dr. Voss explained in the hallway while Juniper sat beside her mother, reading from a picture book about brave princesses. "Some patients wake up after a few days completely normal. Others take weeks or months. And some—" She didn't finish the sentence, but we all knew how it ended. After the doctor left, I suggested that Thorne take Juniper home for a shower and clean clothes. She needed to eat something besides hospital vending machine snacks, and I needed time alone with my daughter. Time to think, to plan, to figure out what I was going to do with the information I'd discovered during my sleepless vigil. Maribel's purse had survived the accident, somehow thrown clear of the wreckage and recovered by the police. They'd brought it to the hospital along with her other personal effects. While Thorne made his endless phone calls and Juniper slept curled in the visitor's chair, I'd gone through it looking for clues about why she'd been driving to see me so late at night. Her phone was cracked but functional, protected by a case covered in Juniper's artwork. I knew her passcode because she'd never been secretive about anything in her life. Never had reason to hide her communications or her activities, until recently apparently. The text messages told a story that made my blood run cold. Messages between Maribel and someone named Miranda. Messages that revealed a friendship I'd never heard about, and conversations that painted a picture of a marriage even more broken than I'd realized. "He's been lying about the business trips," one message read. "Miranda saw him at the casino last weekend when he was supposed to be in Detroit. I can't keep pretending everything's fine," another said. "Juniper's starting to ask questions about why Daddy's never home." But it was the final exchange, sent just hours before the accident, that made my hands shake as I read it. A conversation that explained everything about why my daughter had been driving through the night to reach me, why she'd been willing to risk everything to escape whatever crisis had finally pushed her past her breaking point. "Miranda, did you tell him you found the account?" Maribel, "Not yet. I need proof first. I need someone who can help me figure out what to do." Miranda, "Are you going to tell your mom?" Maribel, "She's the only person I trust right now. The only person who's never lied to me. The only person who's never lied to her." The words hit me like a physical blow, because they revealed the depth of betrayal my daughter had been living with, not just infidelity, which would have been devastating enough. Something worse. Something involving money and deception and trust broken so completely that she'd been willing to drive through the night to find help. I scrolled further back through her messages, looking for more pieces of the puzzle. What I found was 6 months of growing suspicion, careful documentation, and the slow realization that the man she'd married, the father of her child, had been systematically destroying their family from the inside out. Bank statements downloaded to her phone showed withdrawals she hadn't authorized. Credit card bills for purchases she'd never made, investment accounts she'd never opened, taking money from their joint savings and funneling it into schemes that had nothing to do with their family's future and everything to do with Thorne's endless pursuit of easy money and easier women. The casino visits Miranda had mentioned were just the tip of the iceberg. Thorne had been living a double life for months, maybe years, funded by money stolen from his own family's security. And my daughter had figured it out, had been gathering evidence, preparing to confront him when the accident happened. Now she lay unconscious, unable to speak the truth she'd died for, unable to protect herself or her daughter from the man who'd been betraying them both. But I could speak for her, I could protect what she died for. I could make sure that when she woke up, if she woke up, there would still be something left to save. I put her phone back in her purse and sat back down beside her bed. The morning sun was streaming through the window now, warming her face and giving her pale skin a glow that almost made her look alive rather than just not dead. I took her hand in mine and made her a promise. "I know what he did, baby," I whispered. "I know what you found out, and I know why you were coming to see me. And I swear to you on your father's grave and your daughter's future, that man will never hurt you or Juniper again, never." The monitors beeped steadily, the only indication that she could hear me, but somewhere in the place where her consciousness was hiding I hoped she understood. Help was coming, justice was coming, and Thorne Blackwater was about to learn that some betrayals come with consequences he never saw coming. While Thorne was at home playing the devoted father for Juniper's benefit, I made a decision that would have shocked my daughter if she'd been conscious to witness it. I drove to their house with Maribel's keys and let myself in like a thief in broad daylight. But I wasn't stealing anything. I was reclaiming what belonged to my family. The house looked normal from the outside, a modest two-story colonial in a neighborhood where families planted gardens and children rode bicycles on quiet streets. Inside, however, the cracks in their perfect facade were everywhere if you knew what to look for. Bills stacked unopened on the kitchen counter, empty wine bottles in the recycling that Maribel never would have consumed alone, a layer of dust on the family photos that suggested nobody had cared enough to clean them in months. I went straight to their home office, a converted bedroom where Thorne claimed to manage his various business ventures. The desk was chaos, papers scattered everywhere, but it was organized chaos. The chaos of a man trying to keep track of multiple lies, multiple schemes, multiple lives running parallel to each other. I sat down in his chair and began methodically going through everything. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Bank statements showed a pattern of financial abuse that had been going on for over 2 years. Money transferred from their joint account to personal accounts I'd never heard of. Credit cards opened in Maribel's name without her knowledge, maxed out on purchases that had nothing to do with their household needs. Investment schemes that had consumed their savings, their emergency fund, even the money they'd set aside for Juniper's college education. But the investment schemes were just a cover story. The real money was going toward gambling debts, expensive gifts for women whose names I didn't recognize, and a lifestyle that bore no resemblance to the modest suburban existence he claimed to be building with my daughter. Hotel receipts from cities he'd never told Maribel he was visiting, restaurant bills for two when he was supposedly traveling alone for business, a paper trail of betrayal that stretched back years. The most damning evidence was hidden in a folder marked business expenses, as if that label could disguise what was really inside. Photographs, dozens of them, printed from social media accounts and dating apps, showing Thorne with various women in various compromising situations. Not just the party girls from the yacht, but a succession of them stretching back through their entire marriage, a pattern of infidelity so extensive it made my stomach turn. But it was the handwritten notes tucked between the photos that made me understand the full scope of his betrayal. Plans, strategies, exit routes. Thorne hadn't just been cheating on my daughter and stealing from their family. He'd been planning to leave them. The notes outlined his strategy for divorcing Maribel while protecting his assets, for gaining custody of Juniper while minimizing his financial responsibilities, for starting fresh with one of his younger girlfriends while leaving his wife and daughter with nothing. Phase 1: establish separate accounts, one note read. Phase 2: document M's mental health issues. Another page detailed fictional episodes of depression and instability he planned to testify about in divorce proceedings, painting my strong, loving daughter as an unfit mother who couldn't be trusted with their child's care. The cruelest discovery was a folder labeled insurance. Not just life insurance policies, though those were there too, substantial ones that would pay out handsomely if something happened to Maribel, but also medical insurance documentation that showed he'd been preparing to challenge coverage for her therapy and medication, planning to paint her treatment for postpartum depression as evidence of her unfitness as a mother and wife. I sat in that chair for 2 hours, documenting everything with my phone, photographing every page, every receipt, every piece of evidence that revealed the systematic destruction of my daughter's life. By the time I was finished, I had enough material to destroy Thorne Blackwater's reputation, his career, and any chance he had of winning custody of Juniper or keeping a penny of the money he'd stolen from his own family. But evidence wasn't enough. Evidence could be contested, explained away by a skilled lawyer, dismissed as the desperate accusations of a bitter ex-wife and her interfering mother. What I needed was leverage. What I needed was something that would force Thorne to accept my terms without a fight. Something that would make him realize that his only choice was between cooperation and complete destruction. I found it in his computer. Thorne had never been particularly tech-savvy, relying on his charm and his good looks to get through life rather than developing any actual skills. His computer password was Juniper's birthday, because of course it was. The man who'd betrayed his family in every possible way still used his daughter's birthday as his password, probably telling himself this proved he loved her even while planning to abandon her. His email account was a treasure trove of evidence that went far beyond personal betrayal. Business emails that revealed tax fraud, investment fraud, and outright theft from clients who'd trusted him with their money. Correspondence with women that wasn't just infidelity but potentially criminal, given that some of them appeared to be much younger than they'd claimed. And most damaging of all, communications with a lawyer about divorce strategy that revealed the full extent of his planned betrayal. But the email that changed everything was one I almost missed. Buried in a folder labeled personal, it was from someone named Dakota. And it wasn't about romance, or money, or any of the usual subjects that filled Thorne's inbox. It was about Juniper. "I can't wait to meet her," Dakota had written. "From what you've told me, she sounds like the sweetest little girl. I promise I'll be a good stepmother to her. We can be a real family once you get custody. Your wife will probably be so crazy from the divorce that she won't be able to take care of herself, let alone a child." The response, sent from Thorne's account just 3 days before the accident, made my blood run cold. "Don't worry about Maribel. She's weaker than she looks, and she's been making mistakes lately that I can use against her. By the time this is over, she won't have any choice but to let me have Juniper. She'll be lucky if she gets supervised visitation." Mistakes. What mistakes could my responsible, loving daughter have made that would give Thorne leverage in a custody battle? I scrolled through more emails, looking for clues, and found communications with a private investigator, someone Thorne had hired to dig up dirt on his own wife, to find ammunition he could use to destroy her reputation and steal their child. The investigator's reports were clinical and devastating. Maribel's therapy sessions documented as evidence of mental instability, her prescription for anxiety medication presented as drug dependency, her close friendship with her widowed neighbor characterized as inappropriate emotional attachment. Every aspect of my daughter's life twisted and weaponized against her by the man who'd promised to love and protect her. But it was the final report, dated just 1 week before the accident, that revealed the truth about why Maribel had been driving to see me that night. The investigator had discovered something that changed everything, something that would have destroyed Thorne's plans if it had come to light in divorce court. Maribel wasn't the one with mental health issues. Thorne was. The investigator had uncovered medical records showing a history of bipolar disorder, undisclosed gambling addiction, and treatment for what the records described as narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. Records that Thorne had been hiding for years, even from his wife. Records that would have made his custody claims laughable if any judge had seen them. The investigator's recommendation was clear: terminate surveillance immediately. Subject's mental health history and financial crimes create too much risk. Advise client to pursue settlement rather than custody battle. But Thorne hadn't taken that advice. Instead, he doubled down on his plans to destroy Maribel, probably figuring that his charm and his lies would be enough to overcome any obstacles. He'd underestimated the investigator's thoroughness and overestimated his own ability to control the narrative. Now I had everything I needed. Not just evidence of his betrayals, but proof of his plans and weapons he'd tried to use against my daughter. I photographed every document, every email, every piece of evidence that would nail his coffin shut if he tried to fight me. Then I did something that would have horrified my law-abiding daughter if she'd been awake to see it. I copied everything to a flash drive and deleted the originals from his computer. Not the emails, those would be too obvious, but the files, the photos, the documented evidence of his systematic planning to destroy our family. Let him try to explain to his lawyer why his carefully compiled evidence had mysteriously disappeared. Let him try to recreate his plans without the backup files he'd been careless enough to leave vulnerable. Let him realize that the woman he'd dismissed as a powerless old lady had just become the most dangerous enemy he'd ever made. I locked the house and drove back to the hospital, the flash drive burning like a coal in my purse. Thorne was sitting beside Maribel's bed when I returned, holding her hand like a devoted husband, probably planning his next move in the chess game he thought he was winning. He had no idea the game had just changed completely. He had no idea that his opponent had just learned all his strategies, stolen all his weapons, and was about to make a move that would destroy him so completely he'd beg for mercy. But he was about to find out. I waited until midnight to make my move, when the ICU was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines and the soft footsteps of night shift nurses. Thorne had finally gone home to get some sleep, claiming he needed to be fresh for important meetings the next day. Even in the face of his wife's life-threatening injuries, he couldn't abandon his pretense of being a successful businessman with urgent responsibilities. I sat beside Maribel's bed in the dim light, holding her hand and talking to her about my plans. The doctors said comatose patients could often hear conversations around them, and I wanted my daughter to know that her mother was fighting for her, that justice was coming even if she couldn't wake up to see it herself. "I found it all, sweetheart," I whispered. "Every lie he told, every dollar he stole, every plan he made to hurt you and take Juniper away. But he made one crucial mistake. He underestimated the woman who raised you. He forgot that you come from a line of women who don't back down when their families are threatened." At 12:30 a.m. I sent the first text message from my phone to Thorne's. Not from my usual number but from a burner phone I'd purchased that afternoon. The message was simple and devastating. "We need to talk about Dakota." His response came within 2 minutes, which told me everything I needed to know about how deeply he was sleeping. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what you've been planning. Meet me in the hospital cafeteria in 1 hour, or Dakota gets copies of your emails." The next hour passed like a century. I used the time to review my strategy, to make sure I had every detail of my plan perfectly arranged. This wasn't just about stopping Thorne or protecting Maribel and Juniper. This was about justice, about making sure that a man who'd spent years destroying lives faced consequences for his actions. Thorne appeared in the cafeteria at exactly 1:30 a.m. looking like hell warmed over. His hair was disheveled, his clothes hastily thrown on, and his eyes had the wild look of an animal caught in a trap. He spotted me in a corner booth and approached cautiously, like he was walking into an ambush. Which of course he was. "Cordelia?" He slid into the seat across from me, confusion and fear warring on his face. "What the hell is going on? Did you send those messages? How do you know about Dakota?" I placed a manila envelope on the table between us. "I know about everything, Thorne. Dakota, Miranda, the gambling debts, the stolen money, the custody strategy, the private investigator. All of it." The color drained from his face as he stared at the envelope. "I don't know what you think you found, but I found your computer," I said quietly. "Your files, your emails, your plans to destroy my daughter and steal her child. I found evidence of tax fraud, investment fraud, and theft. I found communications with women half your age that your current girlfriend might find very interesting. I found medical records showing a history of mental illness that would make any judge laugh at your custody claims." He reached for the envelope, but I pulled it back. "Not yet. First, we discuss terms." "Terms?" His voice cracked like a teenager's. "What terms? You can't blackmail me, Cordelia. This is insane." "Insane?" I leaned forward, letting him see the fury I'd been keeping carefully controlled. "What's insane is a husband stealing from his wife's emergency fund to pay gambling debts. What's insane is opening credit cards in your wife's name to buy gifts for your girlfriends. What's insane is planning to have your own wife declared mentally incompetent so you can steal her child." "You don't understand the situation," he said desperately. "Maribel has been unstable for months. The depression, the anxiety medication, the way she's been acting. I was trying to protect Juniper, by planning to move her across the country with a woman she's never met, by documenting fictional episodes of mental illness, by paying an investigator to dig up dirt on the mother of your child." I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper, one of his handwritten strategy notes. Phase 3. Establish pattern of neglect. Phase 4. Document substance abuse issues. He stared at his own handwriting like he'd never seen it before. Where did you get that? From your desk, along with photographs of your various girlfriends, bank statements showing your theft, and emails detailing your plans to abandon your family once you'd stolen everything they owned. I put the paper back in the envelope. The question isn't where I got it, Thorne. The question is what happens next. What do you want? The words came out as a whisper, and I could see him calculating his options, trying to find an angle, a way out of the trap he'd walked into. I want you gone, I said simply, out of their lives, out of this state, out of their future. I want a divorce filed immediately, with you waiving all claims to custody, all claims to joint assets, all claims to anything that belongs to this family. I want you to disappear so completely that Juniper grows up thinking her father died in an accident rather than learning the truth about what kind of man he really was. You can't force me to give up my daughter, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. He knew exactly how weak his position was. Can't I? I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. I've already uploaded copies of everything to a secure cloud account. One phone call to the IRS gets you investigated for tax fraud. Another call to the district attorney gets you investigated for investment fraud and theft. A third call to Dakota gets her copies of your emails with all those other women. How long do you think your new relationship will last when she realizes she's just the latest in a long line of women you've used and discarded? The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. He slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his carefully constructed life was about to collapse around him. What about the accident? Maribel's condition? I can't just abandon her while she's in the hospital. You already abandoned her, I said coldly. You abandoned her when you started stealing from your family. You abandoned her when you started cheating with women young enough to be your daughter. You abandoned her when you decided to destroy her reputation to steal her child. The only difference now is that everyone's going to know about it. If I agree to your terms, he said carefully, what happens to the evidence? If you agree to my terms and follow through completely, the evidence stays buried. You disappear, you stay gone, and you never contact Maribel or Juniper again. You become a ghost, a closed chapter, a man who never existed in their lives. In exchange, your secrets stay secret, and you get to start over somewhere else without a criminal record following you around. And if I refuse, then tomorrow morning, copies of everything go to the police, the IRS, the State Bar Association, and every woman you've been involved with in the past 5 years. By tomorrow night you'll be unemployed, under investigation, and probably arrested. By next week you'll be divorced, bankrupt, and facing multiple felony charges. Your choice. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the table, probably running through all the same calculations I'd already made. Every angle he might pursue, every escape route he might take, every way he might try to turn the situation to his advantage. But there weren't any. I'd closed every door, blocked every exit, eliminated every option except the one I was offering him. How do I know you'll keep your word? He finally asked. Because unlike you, I've never broken a promise to my family, I said. And because the only thing I care about is protecting my daughter and granddaughter from you. If you're gone, if you're no longer a threat to them, then I have no reason to destroy you. But if you ever try to contact them, if you ever try to come back into their lives, if you ever try to use anything against them, then everything I know about you becomes public knowledge. He nodded slowly, like a man accepting his own death sentence. When? The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning. You have until Friday to be out of the state. Leave the house keys with the neighbor. Leave a note explaining that you've accepted a job opportunity out of state, and never look back. As far as your daughter is concerned, her father decided that his career was more important than his family. It's not a lie, is it, Thorne? He stood up on unsteady legs, looking older than his 34 years, looking like a man who'd finally run out of tricks and excuses and escape routes. What about my things? Take whatever fits in your car. Everything else stays with the family you're abandoning. I stood up as well, suddenly exhausted by the weight of what I'd just done. And Thorne? If Maribel asks for you when she wakes up, if she wants to know where her husband is during her recovery, I'll tell her the truth, that you couldn't handle the pressure, that you decided your freedom was more important than your family, and that she's better off without you. Because that's exactly what happened, isn't it? He didn't answer, couldn't answer, because we both knew it was the absolute truth. He walked away without another word, his shoulders bent under the weight of his own choices, his own betrayals, his own failure to be the man his family deserved. I watched him go, feeling no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just the grim satisfaction of a job well done, a family protected, a threat neutralized. Tomorrow Juniper would wake up to a world without her father, but it would be a world where she and her mother were safe, secure and free to build a future without. That was worth any price I had to pay. 3 days later, Maribel opened her eyes. It happened so quietly I almost missed it. I was reading to her from Juniper's favorite book about brave princesses, the same stories I'd read to her when she was small. The morning sun was streaming through the window, and her face looked peaceful despite the bruises and swelling. Then suddenly her eyes fluttered open and focused on mine with the clarity of someone who'd been listening from far away and finally found her way back. "Mama," she whispered, her voice rusty from the breathing tube that had been removed the day before. I dropped the book and grabbed her hand, tears streaming down my face before I could stop them. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." The relief was overwhelming, like a dam bursting inside my chest. She was back. My daughter was back. Where? She tried to sit up, wincing as the movement reminded her of her injuries. "Where am I? What happened?" "You're in the hospital. You were in a car accident." I helped her settle back against the pillows, my hands shaking as I smoothed her hair. "You've been unconscious for 4 days. We were so scared." Her eyes moved around the room, taking in the machines, the flowers from well-wishers, the chair where I'd been keeping vigil. "Where's Thorn? Where's Juniper?" The questions I'd been dreading, the conversation I'd been preparing for since the moment I'd walked out of that cafeteria 3 nights ago. "Juniper's at school. She's been staying with Mrs. Patterson, but she comes to visit every day after classes. She's been so brave, sweetheart. So worried about you." "And Thorn?" Maribel's voice was getting stronger, but there was something in her eyes that told me she already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. I sat down on the edge of her bed and took both her hands in mine. "He's gone, honey. He left yesterday morning." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Maribel stared at me for a long moment, processing what I'd said, probably hoping she'd misunderstood. "Gone where? Is he at work? Is he at work? Is he at—" "He's gone, Maribel. Out of state." He said he couldn't handle the pressure, that he needed time to think about what he wanted from life. The lies came easier than the truth would have. Later, when she was stronger, when she was ready, I would tell her everything I'd discovered, but not now. Not when she was still fragile, still healing, still believing her husband might be the man she'd married instead of the stranger he'd become. Her face crumpled, and I could see the war between relief and devastation playing out in her expression. Part of her had probably been expecting this, had probably known on some level that Thorn was capable of abandoning his family when they needed him most, but another part of her, the part that had loved him despite everything, was breaking at the confirmation that he was exactly who she'd feared he was. "He left while I was unconscious," she whispered. "He left while I was dying." "You weren't dying," I said firmly. "You were fighting. And you won. You came back to us." I squeezed her hands. "And maybe his leaving is the best thing that could have happened. Maybe now you and Juniper can build the life you deserve." She closed her eyes, and I could see her mind working, processing not just what I'd told her, but what it meant for her future, for Juniper's future. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Not just hurt, but a kind of clarity that hadn't been there before the accident. "I was coming to see you that night," she said quietly. "Do you know why?" I nodded. "I found your phone, sweetheart. I saw the messages with Miranda. I know you discovered some things about Thorn, about your finances." Her laugh was bitter, painful to hear. "Some things. God, Mama, if you only knew. I found out he'd been stealing from us for months. Credit cards I never opened, accounts I never authorized, money missing from our savings." She tried to sit up again, agitation making her restless. "I was going to ask you to help me figure out what to do, how to protect Juniper, how to get us out safely." "You don't have to worry about that anymore," I said, and meant it. He signed papers before he left, gave up all claims to custody, to joint assets, to anything connected to this family. "Whatever he took, whatever he stole, he can't touch you or Juniper anymore." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "He gave up custody? Voluntarily? That doesn't sound like Thorn. He would never give up without a fight, not when his reputation was at stake." This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the moment when I would have to decide how much truth my daughter could handle. Looking at her there in that hospital bed, broken but alive, betrayed but finally free. I made the choice to give her what she needed. Not the whole truth, but enough of it to understand that justice had been served. I think he realized how much evidence you'd gathered, I said carefully. I think he understood that fighting would only make things worse for him. Sometimes even selfish people make smart decisions when they're backed into a corner. She was quiet for a long time, thinking. What did you do, Mama? The question was soft but pointed, and I could see in her eyes that she knew I'd done something, that her mother hadn't just sat helplessly by while her family fell apart. She knew me well enough to understand that I would have fought for her and Juniper with everything I had. I protected my family. I made sure you and Juniper would be safe. That's what mothers do. Before she could ask more questions, the door opened and Dr. Voss entered with a smile that lit up the room. Well, look who decided to rejoin us. How are you feeling, Maribel? The next hour was filled with medical assessments, cognitive tests, and the gradual realization that my daughter was going to be okay. Not just physically, though her recovery was progressing better than anyone had dared hope, but emotionally too. There was a strength in her voice, a determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. It was like the accident had burned away everything weak and false in her life, leaving behind only what was essential, what was real, what was worth fighting for. Her marriage to Thorne had been slowly killing her spirit, and his abandonment, traumatic as it was, had set her free. When Juniper arrived that afternoon with Mrs. Patterson, the reunion was everything I could have hoped for. My granddaughter flew into her mother's arms like a bird returning to its nest, and for the first time in days both of them were crying happy tears. They held each other like they'd never let go, whispering secrets and promises and plans for when Mama came home. Is Daddy really gone? Juniper asked during a quiet moment, her voice small but not particularly sad. Maribel smoothed her daughter's hair and chose her words carefully. He decided he needed to go away for a while, but you know, we're going to be okay. Just you and me and Grandma Cordy. We're going to be better than okay. And watching them together, seeing the light return to my daughter's eyes and the security return to my granddaughter's world, I knew she was right. They were going to be better than okay. They were going to be free, safe, and loved in ways that Thorne Blackwater had never been capable of providing. That night, after visiting hours ended, and I was alone in the hospital parking garage, I took out my phone and deleted the cloud storage account containing all the evidence I'd gathered. True to my word, Thorne's secrets would stay buried as long as he stayed gone. I'd given him a chance at redemption, at starting over somewhere else with someone who didn't know what he was capable of. Whether he took that chance or squandered it wasn't my concern anymore. My job was done. My family was safe, and sometimes that was the only justice that mattered. 6 months later, I stood in Maribel's new kitchen, watching her make pancakes for Juniper on a sunny Saturday morning. The house was smaller than the one she'd shared with Thorne, a cozy 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood where children played hopscotch on sidewalks and neighbors knew each other's names. But it was theirs, really theirs, paid for with money that belonged to them and decisions made with love instead of fear. Maribel had recovered completely from her physical injuries, though she still had headaches sometimes and got tired more easily than before. The emotional healing had taken longer, but watching her now, laughing at something Juniper said while she flipped pancakes with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted, I could see that she was stronger than she'd ever been. Grandma Cordy, will you tell me about Daddy again? Juniper asked from her perch at the kitchen table, coloring in a book about space exploration. She was 9 now, taller and more serious than she'd been before the accident, but still my granddaughter with the curious eyes and the generous heart. I sat down beside her, considering my words carefully. Over the months, we'd developed a story about Thorne that was true enough to satisfy a child's questions, without burdening her with truths she wasn't ready to understand. Your daddy decided he wanted a different kind of life than the one he had with us, I said gently. Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense to other people, but that doesn't mean it was anybody's fault. I know, Juniper said matter-of-factly. Miranda's mom got divorced too, and she said sometimes parents aren't good at being married even when they love their kids. But I have you and Mama, and that's enough. Out of the mouths of babes, I kissed the top of her head and marveled at the resilience of children, their ability to adapt and thrive even when the adults in their lives fail them completely. Maribel brought the pancakes to the table and settled in across from us, her face glowing with the kind of contentment I hadn't seen in years. "So," she said, cutting Juniper's pancakes into perfect squares, "I have some news." Juniper looked up eagerly. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news. Very good news." Maribel smiled at me over her daughter's head. "I got the job at the elementary school. I start as assistant librarian next month." The job was perfect for her, part-time hours that would let her be home when Juniper got out of school, work that made use of her education degree, and a salary that would give them the independence they needed to build their new life. But more than that, it was work she'd chosen for herself, a path forward that had nothing to do with Thorne's plans or expectations or limitations. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said and meant it completely. "You're going to be amazing." After breakfast, while Juniper played in the backyard with the neighbor's dog, Maribel and I sat on the front porch with our coffee, watching the world wake up around us. It was the kind of peaceful Saturday morning that would have been impossible in their old life, where Thorne's moods and needs and schemes colored every moment, even the quiet ones. "I need to tell you something," Maribel said quietly, setting down her coffee cup. "I know what you did." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know you didn't just happen to find Thorne at that marina. I know he didn't just decide to leave on his own. I know you had something to do with his sudden change of heart about custody and assets and everything else." She turned to look at me directly. "I found some things when I was packing up the house, things he'd left behind, things that made me realize how much worse the situation was than I'd even imagined." I'd wondered if this moment would come, if her natural intelligence and curiosity would eventually piece together the gaps in the story I'd told her. "What kind of things?" "Papers, notes about custody strategy, communications with lawyers about having me declared unfit." Her voice was steady, but I could see the pain in her eyes. "Plans to take Juniper away from me and move across the country with some woman I'd never heard of." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us staring at the street where children rode bicycles, and families walked dogs, and life went on in all its ordinary, beautiful messiness. Finally, Maribel spoke again. "I don't want to know the details," she said. "I don't need to know exactly what you found or what you said to him or how you convinced him to disappear, but I want you to know that I'm grateful, not just for what you did, but for the fact that you were willing to do it. For the first time in my adult life, I feel safe. Juniper feels safe. And that's because of you. That's because of you too," I said firmly. "You were the one who figured out what he was doing. You were the one brave enough to gather evidence and look for help. You were the one who was ready to fight for your Goward's future. I just helped level the playing field." She reached over and took my hand, squeezing it the way she had when she was little and needed comfort. "I used to be afraid that I was weak, that I'd chosen someone like Thorne because I didn't think I deserved better. But I realize now that staying in that marriage didn't make me weak. It made me careful, strategic, protective. I was gathering information and building strength and waiting for the right moment to act. And when I couldn't act myself, I knew exactly who to turn to for help." The pride in her voice made my chest tight with emotion. My daughter had grown into exactly the kind of woman I'd hoped she'd become: strong, thoughtful, capable of protecting herself and her child. The fact that it had taken a crisis to reveal that strength didn't diminish it. Sometimes we discover what we're capable of only when we're pushed beyond what we thought were our limits. "What happens if he comes back?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been lurking in the back of my mind for months. "What if he changes his mind about staying away?" Maribel's smile was small but fierce. "Then I'll handle it. Not the way I would have 6 months ago, trying to manage his feelings and protect his reputation and hope he'd change. I'll handle it the way you taught me to handle threats to my family, completely, permanently, without mercy." Later that afternoon, while Maribel took Juniper shopping for school supplies, I drove out to the cemetery where my husband was buried. I did this sometimes when I needed to think, when I needed to remember who I was before I became a widow and grandmother, before I became the keeper of my family's safety and secret. "We did it, Harold," I said, settling cross-legged beside his headstone like I had when we were teenagers and the world was full of possibilities instead of problems. "Our girl is free. Our granddaughter is safe. The man who tried to destroy them is gone and he's never coming back." The wind rustled through the old oak trees that shaded the cemetery, and I chose to interpret it as approval. Harold would have done the same thing I did, maybe more. He'd always been protective of our family, fierce in his love for Maribel, completely devoted to the idea that family meant you fought for each other no matter what the cost. I know you're worried about me, I continued, because even dead, Harold would have been concerned about the risks I'd taken, the lines I'd crossed, the person I'd become in order to protect our daughter. I know this isn't the woman you married, someone capable of blackmail and manipulation and systematic destruction of another human being. But you know what? I'm not sorry. I'd do it again tomorrow if I had to, because that's what love looks like sometimes. Not the pretty kind that makes for good wedding vows, but the ugly kind that gets its hands dirty when the people you love are threatened. The sun was setting by the time I got back to Maribel's house, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that made everything look like a painting. Inside I could hear laughter and the sounds of a normal evening, homework being finished, dinner being prepared, a child asking her mother to braid her hair for school. Normal. After 6 years of chaos and fear and walking on eggshells, my family was finally beautifully normal. I sat in my car for a moment, listening to the sounds of their life, their freedom, their future unfolding in small, ordinary moments that were more precious than any treasure. Tomorrow, Juniper would start 4th grade at a new school where no one knew her father had abandoned her. Maribel would continue building her new career, her new independence, her new understanding of what she was capable of surviving and overcoming, and I would continue being what I'd always been, the woman who stood between my family and the world, ready to do whatever was necessary to keep them safe. Some stories end with justice served in courtrooms, with villains punished according to law and order restored through proper channels. This story ended with a different kind of justice, a family free from the person who'd been destroying them from within, a chance at happiness built on the ruins of betrayal, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you fought for the people you love and won. Thorn Blackwater had vanished like smoke, leaving behind nothing but empty spaces that were slowly filling with better things, laughter instead of tension, security instead of fear, love that didn't come with conditions or costs. Whether he'd learned anything from his exile, whether he'd become a better person in whatever new life he built, I neither knew nor cared. My job was done, my family was safe, and sometimes in a world full of complicated problems and imperfect solutions, that was enough. I got out of my car and walked up the front steps to join my daughter and granddaughter for dinner, carrying with me the knowledge that I'd done what mothers have done for centuries, whatever it took to protect the people I loved most in the world. The rest was just details.